my own passion about monarch butterflies started in Jersey. It's an exercise class, and my friend Judith walked in with a tray of milkweed seedlings. And she explained very briefly why they were so important. And she herself did a lot of fostering. Anyway, she got some of us really hooked. And so I loved doing it. My high water mark was releasing 125 monarchs in a season, but she did far more than that. Anyway, it's a passion, and I hope it's a lifelong passion. And even if you don't choose to foster, just to know more about them and to plant some things for them would be helpful. Let's see this clicker. Now, it's my first time with a clicker, so I'll do my best, but it seems to be pretty straightforward. Okay, magnificent migrating monarchs. Danaus plexippus, their scientific name. Actually from the Greek. It sounds Latin to me, but it means sleepy transformation. Oh, whoops, I already went too fast. Okay. Can everyone see them? Indigenous to North America, the range from southern Canada down to South America and the Caribbean. We have these three distinct populations. West of the Rocky Mountains, the Western tribe. East of the Rocky Mountains, the Eastern group. And that's the one I'm really going to be talking about today, the Eastern population. And then there is a third one at the tip of southern Florida, which theoretically is a non-migrating group. But one researcher found thousands of them on an oil platform in the Gulf of Mexico, which means that they came from Louisiana, it was figured, onto that platform. So I don't know how much they do or don't migrate. Are they important? They're kind of a bellwether species for the health of the planet in many ways. And they're an important pollinator. Incidentally, many of the things that we touch on today apply not just to monarchs or to butterflies in general, but to insects of many stripes, bees, of course. And they are, alas, a food source for small animals. We'll touch on that a little bit later. What matters to them? Well, nectar plants, and that's after they eclose or emerge from the chrysalis. They need fuel. They need a clean environment, and that really means a non-poisonous environment. They need, which we'll get into a little bit more, they need a tolerable climate. As global warming happens, storms are more frequent, they're more intense, and when you weigh less than half a gram, that's pretty challenging. Though they're strong in their own right, as insects go, but to be bullied by very harsh weather is a hard, threatening thing, and therefore they do need shelter. And they need milkweed for food and nurseries. That's the only plant on which they will lay their eggs, and the only plant that the larvae will eat. Now, yeah, these are dead monarchs here. Apparently the victims of spraying, lest any green thing sprout in this asphalt environment here. As you can see, since the mid-1990s, the eastern monarchs overall declined approximately 85%, huge number. Actually, using the word dwindling was understated. I'm actually going to read this to you that was sent just a few days ago from a great outfit called Monarch Joint Venture. What they do is, as monarchs overwinter in Mexico, the eastern monarchs, the numbers of them are counted by hectares in the Oyamel fir forests where they land, where they shelter for the winter. And so a hectare is about 2.5 acres. And the threshold mark that they've established, this is the World Wildlife Mexico Commission. The threshold is 6 hectares, above which they are theoretically safe from extinction in the near future. Below that, they're still in a threatened situation. Eastern monarch population decreases in the 2022 to 2023 overwintering season. The presence of monarch butterflies in Mexico's Oyamel fir forests this past winter was 22% less than the previous year, according to that most recent survey. They occupied 2.21 hectares. It's a whole lot less than 6. So that's a serious problem. The Western population actually has done pretty well, relatively speaking. In the last season, they gained about 88,000 more butterflies last year than the year previous. Still not a landslide, but better than it was. Okay, factors, real important. Habitat loss. An estimated 165 million acres of breeding habitat has been lost. That's to residential development, commercial development. Environmental contamination, collateral damage due to increasing use of chemical applications, especially for corn and soybean, obviously a biggie in the area we live in. And the destruction of milkweed also, the only food that the caterpillars, that the larvae eat. And now, it used to be, my understanding from reading and hearing, that in farming practice, where fields were planted, between the rows, weeds would come up, and machines would go through and mince those weeds up and just turn them under, and that would do in a great variety of the weeds. But some milkweed, being the tough thing that it is, would survive, and so they had half a chance of living their lives. But over time, genetically modified crops could tolerate direct spraying of the whole shebang. So that kills everything, but it doesn't kill the crops because they've been modified to tolerate it. So that's has been a big factor. And any direct spraying, should there be a larva that somehow got that far on its journey, any direct spraying would kill that outright. And in addition to the farm treatments, insecticides, fungicides, other chemicals, this says a lot to us as property owners, community, to avoid, eliminate possibly the use of those things in our gardens and lawns. Climate events, as I mentioned, can be threatening indeed, especially as these storms get very intense. In Mexico, snowstorms have wiped out swaths of that population. They aren't super common, but they happen. And then there are nor'easters and hurricanes and all that. Plus, there is, in that overwintering area, a sprawl down there as well, and illegal logging of the oil mills. So that diminishes numbers as well. So don't we have protections? I mean, we have a listing under the listings under the Endangered Species Act, but as you can see, the last statement in 2020 was that the monarchs were warranted but precluded, simply meaning that, yeah, they're in tough shape, they're in kind of dire straits, but there are species that take precedence that are more endangered than the monarchs. A determination is supposed to be made next year about whether they can be listed or not. Hopefully, they'll get listed. Pardon me. There was an outfit that didn't list them as threatened, but it's not the same as this, and I don't really know what practical use that has. Migration, this is one of the fun aspects to look at, and one I think that we're all at least somewhat familiar with as a unique and amazing phenomenon. It's the only butterfly to make a two-way migration. And some butterflies can overwinter up here, like swallowtails have been known to do that, to withstand a winter. I remember one year I babysat some swallowtails over the winter for a friend back in Jersey to release them in the spring, which is amazing because they look like pieces of dead bark, you know, but they make it through. However, monarchs can't do that. The triggers for beginning that migration are temperature and food sources. As the temperature begins to dip ever so slightly, and the milkweed and nectar plants diminish a little bit, they start to move 50 to 100 miles a day. They use air currents and thermals to help in their flight. And they may take as much as 2 months to get to a destination. They may travel up to about 3,000 miles. Now that would probably be those in southern Canada, but going down into Mexico. During migration, the fourth generation, which we'll get to, does enter diapause. They stop mating, stop reproducing. And by the way, that migration, of course, is to a place they've never been before. Roosting places are very critical as they make that journey down. They may use the same area, not the same couple of trees, but the same general area each year as they travel. And they prefer dense canopy trees. This gives a basic show of the flow of the western tribe west of the Rockies and so forth, and the other routes that come from all over, but basically go down to Texas and then down to Mexico, excepting that southern Florida route. How do they find their way? Yep. Combination of the magnetic pull of the Earth and the position of the sun, among other things. It's still being studied to see just how they do what they're doing. Eastern monarchs heading for the Sierra Madre Mountains of Mexico, and the west go west of the Rockies to California. In California, they head for the eucalyptus and Monterey cypress trees. Apparently, that climate there is very much like central Mexico. And this, just hitting briefly on the Western tribe, a recent report from the Xerxes Society, and I'll just add my good friend Marsh out in California said this bit was also in her local paper because they really do follow it to see what's going on. We don't have to go over every bit of it, but basically they were 88,000 to the good in their last count. Much better than in 2020 when it was under 2,000. Fairly scary number that was. Now, the pictures like this you perhaps have seen before, quite amazing. As it says, winter vacationing in the sun in Mexico. From October to late March, these eastern monarchs overwinter there. Shows oyamel firs in the background. These firs are on mountains of the sides of an elevation of nearly 2 miles, a south and southwest exposure, I've read, and it has ideal humidity and a good microclimate range, 32 to 59. Below that temperature, they have to draw on their fat reserves, which isn't good when you're that small. They obviously are clustering together for warmth, and tens of thousands can actually gather on these trees and break branches off. It's been known to happen. Whoops, not that. Briefly, we'll hit on this because we'll look at it again later. As you can see, that the egg takes 3 to 5 days to hatch. The larvae hang and eat for about 2 weeks, and then they're in chrysalis for another 2 weeks roughly, and then the adults, the whole cycle taking roughly, as it says, 20 to 32 days. All that depends on the temperature of where they are. About 1 month per generation. Okay, now this, I would like to have made copies of this, which is quite interesting, but I can't. I mean, I do respect copyright, so when you have your sheets here, you can find things like this. I believe this one, yeah, this one's provided by Journey North. So we just talked about overwintering. The end of February into the beginning of March. By mid-March, those monarchs who've been overwintering in Mexico start slowly to go north. Again, temperature is a trigger. The days get a little bit longer, a little bit warmer, and so they start up. And whereas they had paused breeding and just before their journey to Mexico, they now revitalize that. So they're back in a breeding mode, and they lay eggs as they travel, and those eggs that hatch, that's the first generation. Okay, now there's some overlap as these generations go north. They lay eggs, those eggs hatch, and so forth. First, second, third generation. I'm trying to recall, frankly, just when I saw them last year. I think it was around June in my yard. This year I'm going to pay more attention because Journey North does have a way that you can register and report your sightings, which would be kind of fun to do, I think. So they do travel through those generations going north. These monarchs live 2 to 6 weeks. That's it. It's these guys, that fourth generation, that can live up to 8 or even 9 months, which is astonishing to me. Okay, this brings it to more of a local level. I honestly didn't know about this until I did some studying for this presentation about the Chincoteague Monarch Monitoring Project. Excuse me. You can read that while I have a coughing fit. One thing about where we live, the Eastern Shore Peninsula kind of funnels the butterflies to a point. And after they've gone successfully, hopefully, and have shelter on the way from ground sole and bayberry and so forth, then they wait at that tip for the proper winds to bring them over the water. There is a Kiptapeak State Park by the Hawk Watch platform, if you're familiar with it. There is now a small pollinator garden there. And again, this is something I'm going to try this fall in September, probably mid-September, I guess, to watch the migration as it starts to go through there. Must be quite a sight. Now, this is an important segment. We recognize that they're in dire straits, so how can we help? You can grow milkweed, like Dave Perry here has on his shirt, got milkweed. These species over here, we don't find them all here, at least I have not. The one that's actually native to our area is Asclepias tuberosa, butterfly weed, right there. It has a very pretty bright orange flower umbel, and let's see, this next one shows a little more. When I first came down to this area, I had this vision of doing with butterflies what I had done up north, which involved common milkweed, which spreads like wildfire. But I went to Hortco and asked for common milkweed, didn't see it, and they said, oh, but we have butterfly weed. I said, oh, thank you. No, I don't need a pretty flower, you know, I need milkweed. Well, that is milkweed, I just didn't know it. And again, it's native to us. Another one very available down here is swamp milkweed, Asclepias incarnata. I found a lot of butterflies went to that one. Common milkweed, the swamp milkweed, even though it has a similar umbel to the common milkweed, it's a much differently narrow, lance-shaped. Common milkweed is broad, and as you can see when you break it open, you see that it's exuded the milk, which is a bit of an irritant on your skin, but also includes those toxins. Excuse me, folks. It includes toxins which transfer to the egg, actually, and to the larvae, and therefore to any predator. So that bright orange color of the monarch warns predators, you know, don't eat me, I don't taste good at all. One thing is, though, that as the butterfly ages, this would probably most relate to the fourth generations, that toxin does wane a bit, and that's when they're more edible, butterflies. But yeah, so the butterfly, so these things are, the swamp and butterfly weed are most gettable down here. I've sent away for common milkweed from this outfit called Prairie Moon, which is, I recommend highly. And this is, by the way, your copy now. And some people have said that they have seen it down here by what were the railroad tracks and things like that, and dug it up. I've been told it really doesn't transplant readily, but you know, if you have any luck with that, please let me know. I thought I had a bunch of it in my front yard, and I was all excited until I realized that what I had was a variety of hemp. You know, no wonder no butterflies were ever on it. Nothing to do with THC, but it was just, you know, that's what it was. It was a kind of look-alike with smaller leaves. So you can check with your whatever plant supplier you use. I honestly haven't tried Thomas's just because it's a bit of a trek, but they may also have some things to try. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to back up 1 second. If you want to plant milkweed from seed, you can do that. I have an outlet, actually. Maggie's sister Mimi has a lovely property with loads of common milkweed, and so when the pods were ripe, and you have to wait until they're ripe, until they're brown, she gave me lots of those, and now when you have milkweed seeds, of course with all those little fluffy parachutes, number one, I'd suggest you open them in some kind of contained environment, or else they'll be like everywhere. And then you could do stratification, which means you wrap them in moist paper towel, put that in a plastic bag, put that in a fridge for about a month, and then plant them. The point being to mimic a winter dormancy, okay, before they're planted. Or, now I tried that, it didn't work that well for me, maybe it would for you. So I did instead plan B, which was simply to go out to the naturalized part of my property, dig a bit, because as you probably all know, whether it's wildflowers or milkweed seeds or whatever, you can't just broadcast them and expect them to pop up. They might, but if there's any covering of grass or weeds or whatnot, that's too big a barrier. So you do need to rough it up a bit, say 1/2 inch, put your seeds in, cover them lightly, and then water them for a couple of weeks. And hopefully it'll work. That's what I tried this year. We'll see how it works. So that's just a hint there. After they eclose or emerge from the chrysalis, the monarchs have to have fuel. They need that sugar fuel. Or I shouldn't really call it that, but anyway, nectar. So as you can see, there's a big list of annuals and perennials. Some belong in both categories, like asters and so on. I'm sure a lot of you are a lot better gardeners than I am, but I know Dave has had good success with lantana. I have butterfly bushes and also goldenrod, which was not on this list here, but that's an important one, especially as they're in the migrating season. That timing coincides with that journey, which is really nifty. So you see a whole list here. Again, on some of those sites that you might visit, you'll see different lists. They don't always agree, but probably your best shot is to ask your landscaper, horticulturist, what they suggest, what works for you in your area. They do go to plants that are open during the day, that are clustered, that are bright, you know, that kind of thing, sort of common sense. They also like fruit, rotting fruit, as you can see here, and banana, oranges, watermelon, whatever. And I read that you could also give them a shot of wine or beer to aid the fermenting process. Of course, anytime you have something like this, it might draw other critters, so, you know, to keep an eye out. And they need moisture, for sure. When the first time I saw a small group of, it wasn't monarchs, it was maybe swallowtails, but they were clustered on a bunch of liquid on a garage floor. And I just couldn't figure out what had happened, and I was concerned that they were lapping up oil, which probably a garage floor is not the best place. Anyway, they do need moisture, and they also need the minerals and other salts that are available basically in muddy water situations. And the males need the minerals to produce pheromones, which they transfer to the female, and which is transferred to the egg. And see this one. Ah, yes, we'll get back to that in a second. You can make your own, this is called puddling, and you can make your own puddling station quite easily, really, by digging a shallow depression in the ground, putting in a mixture of landscape sand, like the kind that's not salty, with a bit of that dirt that you've excavated, just about 1/2 inch or so deep there, and water it down. Make kind of a big mud pie there. And as it dries out, water it down a little more. Because they do need that. There's something else I wanted to add about that. Oh, and you can also do an insect bowl, just a small bowl with pebbles in it perhaps, because insects, including butterflies, they can't land on water easily. Well, maybe some of them can, but otherwise they're going to get their wings wet, they're going to be threatened. So it gives them water without going into a big bird bath, and it gives them a platform to stand on. In the puddling thing, if you make one of those, you could put in a couple of nice flat ornamental rocks, and that gives them a place to bask in the sun, keep their wings dry, and also safely get the water they need. A nice picture of one of Dave and Sarah's gardens. You have butterfly weed here, and in the back, hard to see, is lantana. You've had success with that.
They love it.
So, and of course, there are a lot of ways of approaching this. I do quite a bit in containers, but also some in the ground. And then there's fostering. This doesn't have to be a super complicated thing. It does take a certain amount of consistency, and but you do need like some kind of small workspace, plastic containers with lids, some fine netting, and paper towels. You want your workspace to be all ready to roll as you approach this. Say fine netting. Now, window screening can be used. In fact, I think that's, you'll see in one of the pictures of Dave's, but not when they first hatch out. I learned the hard way that when those eggs hatch, they can, the teeny weeny larvae can go right through the holes of screening, which was astonishing to me. Hence this tool, easily gettable in Walmart or wherever. Oh, there was a button for you, Terry, I forgot. Unpaid protester. Now this is the method I was taught, and everyone has their own wrinkle, really. What I was shown is that, and you go through a lot of paper towel, is that first layer you lightly mist with water, and then when you've collected the eggs, those bits of leaf or the whole leaf will go down on it, and it'll be covered with another paper towel that's lightly misted with water, and the lid goes on. You don't have to worry about airflow at that point, because just taking off the lid each day will give adequate air. This happens to show common milkweed, I'm pretty sure. So when you're ready, you examine your milkweed for eggs. About the size of a pinhead, pale yellow, cream colored, and carefully remove the leaf from the stem and put it in your container. Or if it's just one little egg and a big old leaf, you can just tear off part of that leaf and put that in the container. And as I mentioned, top it with paper towel and then a lid. And each day you're just going to lightly mist it. You don't want it soggy, too soggy, just lightly mist to keep the eggs viable. And then on the third day or so, you look very carefully, and you'll see some very tiny, I mean, we're talking 64th of an inch kind of larvae. And at that point, you transfer them carefully to some kind of open net container. Now, there are varieties of this. I'm sure we've all seen the kind that teachers often use in a classroom so that their whole class can enjoy the thing about sew with net sides and a zipper top, which works. I had one. I finally had to throw it out because it was done in. Part of the reason being that as the cats grow, caterpillars, henceforth cats, they love to latch onto the zipper that's around the top of the container, and that makes things tricky. And at some point, you need to cut it off even. That's what happened to this. When I left Jersey, my mentor, Judith, gave me this, and basically a laundry basket kind of situation. And it works when you have many and when it has a lid. There's nothing wrong with using this if it has a lid, but the reason the bars through it is that I did have to cut it off at one point because a few of them had decided to go into their next stage right along the zipper. So, you know, it's the only way I could get it to work. Also, personally, I find this kind of setup hard to keep clean, and that's an important thing to do. These cats eat and poop and grow. That's what they do. And they poop a lot. and that's called frass. And so you want to dump it out each day, sometimes twice a day as they get bigger. And you're going to be providing fresh milkweed every day, about 20 leaves per cat per lifetime. I do want to add at this point that when you're fostering, I mean, on the level that I do it, or Dave does it, or my friend Judith, it's like backyard fostering, right? This is not the same as the breeders who do thousands of these to release at weddings, at funerals, at whatever. I mean, it's a lovely idea, but has been criticized because of the changes it can that are wrought in the butterfly's health. So at first I read it with alarm, but then I realized they were talking about a whole different scale of stuff than I'm approaching. Whoops, back I go. Okay, here is, I was so impressed by this illustration. This one, I don't think was Journey North, it was one of the others. But they actually, this is not Photoshop, they actually got all these stages in the same picture. So you can see the egg here, the first instar. As they grow, they molt. Whoopsie. They molt, they shed that skin, and they eat it, all except the head part, because it's very nutritious for them. And this picture actually looks relatively bigger than I have experienced them. But anyway, that's after first 3 or 5 days, and then you can see how much it grows, and fourth and fifth. Instar is what it's called between molts. It's a stage of growth. And when they're really ripening up, they're a couple inches long and fat and sassy if they're doing well. Because they do molt, the first time you see at the bottom of your container this black mass, you think the worst, you know, some dreadful thing has happened to my caterpillar, but it's simply the molt, and they hadn't eaten it all, or it was the head part. So again, that's the cycle that you're going through. So it's from start to finish, it's about a month. Now this gets tricky as the season goes on, because in about mid-August, those triggers are going to start activating of temperature and loss of food, and they're going to start migrating. So do you want to keep on taking eggs in? Do you have enough milkweed to feed them through that larval state? And when they're released, when they close or they emerge, are there enough nectar plants around to fuel their journey? And these are all things, there is no hard and fast rule on it. You just have to kind of play with it. So just to throw that in. After about 2 weeks of feeding and pooping and feeding, the cat migrates to the top of its container, and it'll hang there for 10 or 12 hours or so, and sometimes a little longer, in a J shape. Now sometimes it doesn't migrate to the top of your container. If it can at all, and they're very sneaky, it'll migrate outside of the container onto a nearby shovel, tabletop, workbench. You never know. They really seem to want to go away. Anyway, when they're there, they exude this silky substance, and it makes a little pad, and using their prolegs, kind of tentacles, which have loads of tiny little hooks, they attach themselves to that pad. And from there, they go through the process of forming the chrysalis. Now, Dave did a lovely film of this process. At the very end of the presentation and all, we can hopefully go into that link, and you can watch it if you so desire. It's quite interesting because it pushes off its skin again and forms that chrysalis, and it takes a couple days to harden. No more feeding at this point, no more poop, it's just hanging there. You do not want to disturb this in any way. I've done it by mistake, you know, and next thing you know, you have a dropped chrysalis on the bottom of the container, liquid oozes out, and then it's game over. They're done. Yeah, it's really hard. It is. Now here again is Dave's setup with screening. I'm just so astonished that you have them all at that same stage, all that, and we can go into that a little bit later, but it's a beautiful sight. Now, this to me, I mean, the migration itself is such a fancy and amazing process. This is even fancier. It is just astonishing to me. Metamorphosis, as you can see. This, by the way, when it becomes very dark like that, changing from the green to very dark, it means that the closing is imminent. It's going to happen within hours. And so it starts to happen. But when it goes into chrysalis, then the first thing the butterfly does is digest itself, okay? Using enzymes that are built into it. And that's just astonishing to me. All except for a group of highly organized cells called imaginal cells, imaginal discs, sorry. And these are something that are actually present from the get-go, right in the egg. And their function is to produce the cells for each body part, from head to legs to abdomen, whatever. Every part has a disc associated with it. And so these discs feed on this protein soup that is now within that capsule. And using that, they reconfigure themselves into the butterfly that we know and love. Still magical, I think, you know, quite an amazing thing. Sometimes it doesn't work, and this I've sadly experienced a few times. They are really subject to attack by parasites. The first time I ever saw this happen in a container, I felt sure that somehow I had a thread in there that it latched onto. And it's not. It's a tachinid fly. Produced that. And as you can see, this one, I have trouble pronouncing it, but we just call it OE, a debilitating protozoan parasite that attacks larvae. It can even attack eggs. It can put the spores on the leaf before it's even harvested, which is a scary thought, but it happens. And the tachinid fly, like it says here, they lay their eggs on the larvae and ingest it before it can pupate properly. then there are various kinds of wasps that are predators also. The eggs, incidentally, backtracking a little bit, the female can lay between 300 and 500 eggs in her brief lifetime, but only less than 10% of those survive. So that's another reason to think about fostering. But when you are collecting the leaves that the eggs are on, and I just learned this recently, it's best not to wait, to do it as soon as you see that egg, pop it in its container, because you lessen the chance of parasite attack. Likewise, if the season's going on and you want to stockpile a bit of milkweed, you can do that, you know, so that it doesn't all just wither on the vine there, but you can take some leaves, wash them off, dry them, put them in the fridge. It'll last for a week or so. And but again, to keep them clean. And the eggs, did I mention, was there? They can be attacked by spiders, ants, ladybugs. Ladybugs eat aphids, which is great, you know, but they also eat monarch eggs, which is sad. Aphids, by the way, can often cover a milkweed plant. They don't actually hurt the larvae, but they can produce this sooty kind of mold substance, which isn't good for the plant. So smashing them up is supposed to be a pretty good activity. And this, okay, having been on the dark side of this shows they've set up with those same chrysalids who have closed, they've emerged, and they're hanging, and they need to do that for at least several hours, sometimes a little longer, a day, or even a day and a half. And that's so that this hemolymph gets in, fluid gets into their wings and makes them, you know, ready to emerge fully and fly. It's kind of like a plasma substance, like our blood. And now here's one, a graduate on Dave's finger, ready for release. This one, yeah, is a male. You can tell from the two black dots, and the male's black lines are thinner than the females, if you had them side by side. My mentor Judith used to be fond of saying, at this stage, she said, you let them go. They are not pets. Because you can become very attached to them. And when you have one, like in that other slide, that is obviously not hanging in a J like it should, or it comes out and it's only half closed and it's not opening its wings. I mean, you can give it a little more time and a tiny bit of Gatorade at the bottom to give it a little fuel, but often as not, they're just not going to make it. And so I said, what do I do? And she said that she thought the most humane thing was to wrap it and put it in the freezer, you know. And after that, after I'm sure it's frozen, then I take it out in the garden to be food for somebody else. But it's hard, you know. You do get attached to these beautiful things. There we are. Okay. One thing before this is thank you, Carolyn McGavick. Can you raise your hand? If you've heard of a butterfly count in the Eastern Shore, this woman has organized that. And it's a really neat activity to be part of. Kind of have different groups assigned different places. Could be down near Kiptopeke or what have you. And then you do not have to be an expert on all things butterfly to be part of it. You can just say, oh, there's one, you know, there's one. And it's a fun thing to do. And then a tally is made of what you've seen. It's a citizen science kind of thing. And Carolyn brought this in, which is a fascinating book, Bicycling with Butterflies. Sarah Dykman, her plan was to bicycle along with the migration. Some of that took a lot longer than she had planned on to actually see quantities of butterflies. Part of the interesting bit about this book is her sheer athleticism. This woman bicycles routinely, like 50 miles a day, right? And so, but it's very good. Thank you for bringing it in, Carolyn. And let's see, anything else? Oh, when it comes to, again, try your local nursery first, of course, but Prairie Moon has loads of pollinator garden choices that are fun to look at and see what works for you. I had a lot of luck with Blazing Star, not just for butterflies, but for bees as well. And okay, I think we're at the question part, if I can help.
So Sharon, the aphids that you were mentioning, are those little red bugs?
Yeah, those little orange, ugly people.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Gazillion of them, yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
So,
They're easily squishable.
Yeah, yeah, because I heard that, I mean, they are, you know, like a natural part of the cycle, so.
Yeah.
But I guess they do eat the milkweed as well.
Yeah, they can carry
Yeah.
out.
So the first time Julie and I saw the monarch butterflies was in 1970. They don't exist in England. And
Really?
It was in Ocean City, Maryland.
Huh, okay.
And so those would have been 4th generation heading home.
What
When
month was
did you
it?
see them?
Hmm?
What time of summer? What time?
October.
October?
Oh,
yeah.
They were getting ready.
4th generation.
Yeah, they'd be,
Okay. And we were amazed. They were all over us. You know, it's just
oh, neat,
fabulous. Yeah.
neat. Yeah, I think many people have those memories of loads of them back when.
Yeah, yeah.
There was a chap named Charles Vaughan who used to track up at Wallops banded monarchs. Is he still doing this?
I have no idea. I don't know. One thing I heard about, and this was years ago, from my mentor, Judith, and she said she used to do some banding, and then she had heard, and this may have been updated, that down in Mexico, a lot of butterflies were falling prey to, the deal was that if you found a butterfly down there with a band, you could turn it in and get money. And so they were shaking trees.
Oh,
You know,
geez.
and getting, now that again was a long time ago, so I don't know how
This was
active.
a long time ago too, so that didn't stop.
Yeah, hopefully that's not happening now, but I have no idea, really, right?
Is it primarily the temperature change or the sunlight change that induces their heading south?
That's a good question. My hunch would be both play a role, really. Because like birds we know,
Yeah.
and I'm not, really not a bird, but I know the angle of the sun seems to have a lot to do with what they're up to. And so that's a good question, but I would think it'd be both, Dave?
It's those things, but it's also the milkweed dies off.
Right.
The females know, there's nothing for me here, and also your nectar flowers are, you know,
Right.
are more scarce, so that those are triggers also.
Absolutely. Yeah, Janet?
We're getting longer, warmer summers here. So that would imply that the monarchs will stay later here if they're temperature sensitive.
Right.
So they will be later getting to Mexico, and if it's getting warmer in Mexico, they will be earlier starting north.
Mm-hmm.
So how is that going to impact that breeding, that resting time and the breeding time in Mexico and the first generations back?
That's a really good question. But one thing occurs to me, what Mike brought up about angle of the sun and so on. Even though the temperature's warmer, the angles may be still a certain trigger. That, but that's beyond my thing.
Again, if you don't know this is perfectly fine, but it's a fascinating question. Do we know where in their brains they sense the magnetic fields of the Earth?
I don't know. It's entirely possible, but I honestly, I don't know. I mean,
Well, it's a
Something
fascinating
sensitive.
subject because we're all locked into the so-called 5 senses, but we may also have, at least some of us who have a good sense of direction,
Right.
Probably have a magnetometer somewhere in our brains
Huh.
that tells us where we are in position to the Earth.
Right.
And it's something that evolved fairly early. The monarchs clearly have it. I would be very interested to know where in their brains this sixth sense actually exists.
That's a good question, but you'd have to ask one.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, there is, again, so much literature out there. I was astonished as I dug into this, just because of the presentation, how many layers went into, and the anatomy too. Sorry.
In conjunction with Terry's observation, half a century ago, I used to help band hawks down at Fisherman's Island.
Oh, okay.
And one morning in the dark, we were setting up, and we noticed that the two large red cedar trees opposite our banding site, they looked like they had died during the week. I was surprised. The
Right.
light came up gradually. They were all orange and yellow. I thought
Oh,
they were dying.
really?
Thousands of monarchs kind of.
Wow, where was
Thousands
this?
of- Fisherman's Island.
Oh, Fisher.
On the
Wonderful.
south end of
Oh,
the
that's so
country.
nice to hear. That's great.
That was half a century ago, though.
Yeah.
Well.
10% survival of the eggs is an astonishing number.
Yeah, less than
Anyway.
10%
It's like
actually.
2%.
Any idea why?
Predators,
Yeah.
weather events, all those things. I mean, they're fair game for those eggs to survive, you know, even
So
a
they
day.
don't- If you have 100 eggs, you don't just get 10 of them alive, it's the predators and so on.
Yeah, yeah. I know that I guess last season, I was at that kind of Mets point, like, I'm not sure how much milkweed I really have right now and how many flowers and so on. So I'd see milkweed with loads of eggs on them. But I would hesitate. I'd say, let me wait a day, which I shouldn't have done anyway because of because of spores of OE and things like that. And then I'd say, let me think on it and check in tomorrow. And then I'd come back and they were almost all gone. You know, so that choice, yeah. Yeah, Sue.
You know, we talked about the issues that are, threatening the population here, but is there a danger in the Mexican population, not only from, whether it's turning into, but also from tourism itself? Is there a danger of?
That's a good question. I don't know. I know that sprawl was mentioned and illegal logging,
Yeah.
and I would not be surprised at all.
Yeah,
if-
because there was a story just recently about there was a big desert bloom this past winter, and they had to close off the place because there were so many people coming, they were trampling the flowers they were coming to see.
Right.
So I would imagine that could be a real issue if there was too many visitors and too much,
I would not be shocked.
impact.
I'm glad you mentioned that though, because one thing that the Mexican government did was establish a biosphere protected area.
Yeah.
So assuming that's enforceable, then
Right.
that would help. But I know what you mean. We seem to kill the things that I remember watching a film on, what was it? I think it was doll sheep or something like that, that was being hounded so much by people trying to get pictures of it, that it
Yeah.
fell off the cliff finally and died, you know?
Mhm.
It's just
Yeah.
a horrible
Yeah, I know.
thing. Yes, sir.
Local knowledge. I bought property here in 1969.
Wow.
I've been retired here for 30 years this January, but I came here to fish. And one of the things I learned right away is when you see the monarch butterflies in the spring, the red drum or channel bass are in the surf.
Really?
There you go.
How about that?
That's true of the Bear Islands. We used to go out to fish Bear Islands
Yeah.
for drum in October. When the butterflies were migrating south, that was the
Either
sign.
way.
Right, right.
The drum were the surf.
How about that?
Either way.
That is really neat. And that still pertains, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, we don't see many butterflies.
Oh,
in it.
that's true.
Yeah.
But I have a question about why they aren't multiplying or their numbers are diminishing, but you had that migration chain, and I think of a chain, and all you have to do is destroy one link in a chain, and the whole chain is of no use anymore. But what are the most vulnerable parts of that chain? Is it the insecticides, is it overwintering? What is it, loss of habitat, but like clean farming?
Yeah.
And I'm a small farmer, but I fight pine trees. Pine trees are a weed. They take over my drainage ditches, the edges of my field. So I spray to kill the pine trees. I just wonder if that's killing the milkweed, or is it clean farming, or what's the main thing is hurting the butterfly?
Right.
And
I can't
what link in the chain?
specify the main, but my gut tells me that, well, loss of habitat, sprawl, and, you know, just building, but also chemical. That would be my number one hunch of, not necessarily just what you're doing, which sounds pretty localized. I think where you're spraying is killing the milkweed, yeah.
Sure.
But on a grander scale, because we have such big farms here, that would strike me as the bigger danger, you know, that what used to survive in those aisles between, you know, crops no longer has
Other
goes to a
thing you used
chance.
to see is the railroad
Right.
running north and south. And they sprayed that thing to keep the weeds and off to the side of the
Yeah.
railroad. So I don't know what's gonna happen to that area now that
That's
the
a good
railroad is
question.
gone.
With the rail trail or what have you.
They'll have to keep spraying.
But
it
they
every
probably
year.
won't spray it as far, the width of it probably won't be as
Yeah.
much as it was.
One of the things that makes me sad, but perhaps it's inevitable, as you go down 13 and onto the right-of-way areas, maybe they were just trying to keep the weeds down here, but a whole row of trees 3 yards in are all turning brown as well.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Aerial spraying is particularly harmful. Modern spraying, they try to keep the spray as close as possible to the ground of what they're spraying. But they used to do a lot more aerial spraying on the shore here. And one September, I was hunting dove at a field that was more than a mile across the marsh from a field that was being aerially sprayed for cutworms. And as I was sitting there, I saw this monarch coming across the field, and it died about 10 feet away from me. And it had obviously been hit. The aerial spraying was very, very harmful
Yeah,
to flying
yeah.
insects.
I wasn't aware of that. I mean, of that happening.
Thank you, Sharon.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.